Good evening, good afternoon, good morning to wherever you're watching the show from. As always, as promised, every Sunday we're here. We're going to talk about, of course, our current state in the struggle for liberation, not only as Ugandans, but also as it relates to our indigeneity and as it relates to us as Africans. So yeah, I'm grateful that I'm here today, sending out, of course, regards for anyone who has been going through a tough time. I hope that this season does bring healing to its, or wherever you want to manifest, and to everyone who's receiving their blessings, may they be received in tenfold. So yeah, I'm grateful to be here with all of you today. As always, welcome to the Tower at UNN. And today we're going to be talking about why the warmongering zombie is back or out for blood and back in the Congo. Why is it that the UPDF and the Congolese forces have joined arms to go back into Congo to fight ADF, and what this means? So, as I said, good morning, good afternoon to all of you. So as we start the show, I'm going to start with a video, just, how we usually, I don't have access to any of the anthems. So I'm going to start with a video that might be an anthem for today's show. And then after, we will go into the topics of discussion today. Today, we're going to be talking about UPDF, ADF, and China, and the race for cobalt in the Congo and what that means for us. So we'll first start with this first video to frame today's show, and then we'll continue from there. So I'm going to play the video.
Well, I think the real question is that people are not clear on capitalism because capitalism is a very vicious system, but what it does is it embroideries its viciousness with all sorts of elusive terms. For example, many of us would support capitalism because we actually believe that in a capitalist system, there's a chance for us to get the same amount of money as Rockefeller gets, because we're told that under capitalism there is equality of opportunity. So that we feel that if this year we didn't make as much as Rockefeller made, then we got to work a little bit harder, and next year we're going to make it. But if we carefully examine a capitalist system, we will see that it's based on exploitation, because the viciousness of capitalism, and the reason why once black people examine we can never be for it, is that under a capitalist system, the fruits of those who labor are enjoyed by somebody else. That is, those who do the laboring, the fruits of their labor, they don't enjoy it. As a matter of fact, we could say under capitalism that the fruits of the labor of the toiling masses are enjoyed by those who do not labor. And again, as black people, we have clear examples of it. If we were to get the fruits of our labor from slavery, just from slavery, all we got to do is go to Nixon and say, hey, look, you give us the fruits of our labor from slavery and we forget the score. We would be the richest people in the country. Again, because under capitalism, the individual exploits the labor of the people. Now, people get confused because this is a capitalist system and it's a developed system. It's a technological system. So they combine capitalism with technology and development, and they think that there is no other possible way to develop this rapid terms of development without going through the capitalist route. But certainly we have examples that show the opposite of that. China is a clear example of that. Cuba is, North Korea, North Vietnam. These countries certainly in Africa, where countries have chosen the socialist path, such as Tanzania, Guinea, Congo, Brazzaville, Algeria, we see that there is another way to develop and get the same type of things that we have under the capitalist system, but in a system that does not exploit each other, where all of us work and the fruits of our labor are divided evenly. Let me show you how backward capitalism is. It's a backward system. We could make two statements about capitalism to show how backward it is. About America. America's a capitalist country. It's thoroughly capitalist. It's an imperialist country. But we could say that, number one, America is the most technologically advanced country in the world. And that's an undeniable fact. It's a truism. It's a truism. America is the most scientifically developed country in the world. And right under that, we could say a second fact, which will show you how backward America is. We could say that America, in 1945, made for her people better cars than she does in 1973. And if you analyze this, you'll see how vicious the system is, because here's America with its great technological skills, its great scientific ability, and rather than making a safe car for people that will last 20 years, which they can do with the scientific knowledge that's at their fingertip, they rather take this knowledge and build a car which will break down every 2 years, so you're forced to buy another car. Thus, you see, under capitalism, what they do is they take their scientific skills, and rather than using it for the benefit of the people, they use it to further exploit the people. And certainly this type of system is too backward.
So that was, of course, Ancestor Kwame Ture talking about what capitalism is and what it has done to the world. We have to understand that it is a global structure, and that's something that we have been talking about in the programs before up until today. So I wanted to state that as, you know, the beginning point or the jump off point into today's program, because we're going to be looking at cobalt mining in the Congo and China's involvement with the mining of cobalt. And what we need to understand about cobalt, I'm going to show a variation of videos, and these videos I'm showing them for us to ask questions. And what we need to understand is that cobalt is very rare. And cobalt as a resource, this is in everything that runs with a battery, can make batteries run the longest, in our phones, in our laptops. But right now, it's also a window for, there's been talk of reducing the amount of oil that we use as a people globally. So cobalt would be used to build electric cars. And China, they came to the realization that China actually had access to this whole economic structure, and the idea was to get China out of the Congo. But for that, they had to use Museveni. So we're going to see a variation of videos, and after each video, I'm going to pose questions, or you can go ahead and pose questions yourself, to yourself or in the chat, and then we could try to answer them as we linger towards the end of today's show. So as I said, today's show, we're going to be talking about UPDF's return to the DRC. In terms of sources, we're going to be looking at two different papers, or two different articles actually, and a variation of videos. We're going to look at an article that was published on the 20th of November 2021, and this article was titled "A Power Struggle Over Cobalt Rutters the Clean Energy Revolution." And this was written by Dion Cersei and Michael Forrestai and Eric Lipton in the New Yorker, the New York Times. Sorry, not the New Yorker, but the New York Times. And then another article on the 22nd, published on the 22nd of February 2022. It was also by the New York Times, "Chinese company removed as operator of cobalt mine in Congo." Again, written by Eric Lipton and Dion Cersei. So let's go into the first video of today. The first video that we're going to watch, a video on the UN court ordering Uganda to pay Congo reparations for, of course, the war that Uganda actively participated on the Congolese people, committing human rights abuses and, outright genocide of the Congolese people. And Uganda was reprimanded for this and asked to pay a certain amount that would total to annual payments of around, I think, 65. They're going to elaborate on it in the video. 65 million per year, per annum, every September. So we're going to watch that video and then we'll go into the next video.
The total sum is to be paid in annual installments of $65 million US due on 1 September of each year from 2022 to 2026. The court observes that the evidence before it, notably the mapping report, demonstrates that a large number of civilian casualties occurred in the DRC between 1998 and 2003, and that a significant part of these casualties can be linked to internationally wrongful acts of Uganda. However, there is insufficient evidence to support the DRC's claim of 180,000 civilian deaths for which Uganda owes reparation. that Ugandan troops had committed grave breaches of international humanitarian law, pursuant to which Uganda has a duty to investigate, prosecute, and punish those responsible for the commission of such violations.
So in that video, as you can see, the sum is about 325 million that we owe to the Congo, and we must pay yearly. And this, of course, went through an international council whereby Uganda was asked to pay that for the crimes against the Congolese people. But the reason as to why I show that video is to then now question ourselves, why are we back unconstitutionally? Because I did not see, did you see any parliamentary sitting about UPDF soldiers going into the Congo once again on top of the debt that we have to pay Congo? Why are we in the Congo once again? Why are we participating in the Congo once again for the hand down for ADF? So let's take then a better look at ADF and how this all started. So today is going to be a lot of going into the narrative that surrounds not only, first of all, we have to understand the narrative that supports the infiltration of some African countries or African leaders into other nations, and the way how it finds its grounding in rhetoric such as terrorism. So let us revisit the bombings that we saw last year.
This is the moment the first bomb exploded in Kampala. At a checkpoint at the Central Police Station, exactly 3 minutes later, a second went off near the Parliament building. 3 suicide bombers were involved. They were killed along with 3 other people. Dozens were injured. This footage was released by the police, who said a 4th man was arrested and a suicide jacket found at his home.
Very unfortunate. It's happening at such a time that we're trying to go back to our normal livelihoods. So if these people can come at such a premises of police and set off a bomb, then you know things are not good.
The aftermath shows how powerful the blasts were. Broken windows, burning vehicles, and terrified people. Police say the attacks were carried out by a gang working alongside the Allied Democratic Forces. The armed group has its roots in Uganda, but is now based in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Its fighters have killed thousands of people in the east in recent years.
The hallmarks of the attack clearly indicate that the ADF-linked radicalized groups who still have a desire to carry out lethal attacks on soft targets using suicide attackers and improvised explosive devices behind these attacks.
This attack follows 2 others last month. One killed a waitress in a restaurant, and a second on a bus 2 days later injured several people. ISIL claimed those attacks. The ADF has pledged its allegiance to the group.
The involvement of the Ugandan army in the peacekeeping missions in the region, especially in Somalia, makes Uganda a target of some of these groups.
What's happening in Uganda also comes at a time when the military is planning to deploy its soldiers to eastern DRC to help Congolese troops and UN peacekeepers fight ADF. There, they'll help Congolese troops and UN peacekeepers to fight ADF forces. Catherine Soy, Al Jazeera.
So from that video, I think one of the main questions that then we should have is, number one of the questions that I had is, this radical group of ADF, when did it start being, when did ADF come to play? And when did ADF, a radicalized Islamist group, start to exist in Uganda? Because when the first bombings happened, if we can remember, these were linked to and these were linked for the benefit of Uganda entering Somalia for peacekeeping reasons. If we remember correctly, some of the bombings that did happen, I've forgotten the year. I think it was during the World Cup, if I'm to remember correctly, and this was it was 2010, I believe, but I'm not so sure. Don't get me on the dates. But when this first happened, this was linked to Al-Shabaab, and this appropriated our involvement in Somalia. But time has revealed that Uganda's involvement in Somalia had nothing or little to do with terrorism, but had more to do with extending the U.S. power arm in the region and playing a role in Somalia and the dismantling of the Somalian state. So now we have the rise of ADF. So we must start to ask our questions: where is the origin of ADF? And also we must ask the question with, of course, the background knowledge of Museveni's relationship, or Museveni's regime's relationship with Muslims or Islam practicing people in Uganda, and what that has meant for that community, and the characterization of extreme Islamist groups that never existed before but seem to be popping up a lot during Museveni's regime for the benefit of the invasion of our other neighboring countries by UPDF. As I said, we saw it in Somalia, we're now seeing it in the Congo. So next I'm going to play a video of members claiming to be part of the ADF in the Congo who are Ugandan, claiming to be part of the ADF. And I want us to examine the validity of those claims and the relevance of those videos to the major crimes that are being put or posted to the ADF. And let us look at every video critically.
Beni mtawani wa Musa. So Allah nyuzi jengenda irambi shahada, irambi kumile nuji. Za amiri mtawani wa munibu nsaba Allah mpe kumile nuji, ampe jana Firdausi. Anyuze kasira kota. اليوم بيدي لك خوزام تباني وعبد الله سأل الله جيت لقيت شهادة يوكم وانجو عم بينكم يرنون نونجي. السلام عليكم. الله سوكم سوتوي توي شهادة يوكم وانجو ساسرين بزد بانك Musa Anton Tanya wa Safra.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Mpitibwa Nuhu Ismaila balengera nzalibwa ku kyalo Kazinga mugombolola y'Imalangala Busujju kitange ye porotaziyo. Kusaba kwange nsaba Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bwabeera ntutte ku lulumba luno olw'ennyinza okulumba abakafiri asonyiwe omwoyo gwange aguwe ekyo kye yasuubiza kubanga nafuluma ku lulwe era ngenda ku lulwe biidhinihi azza wa jalla. Sirina kusaba kusinga okwo ye kennyini kwe yatuyigiriza ngamba nti rabbana atina fi dunya hasanatan wa fil akhirati hasanatan wakina adhaban nar. Era nyongera okusaba nga ngamba nti atina kama wa'adtana innaka la tukhlifu al-mi'ad. Era nyongera okumusaba asobole okuteerawo abaana bange wasiira amakubo abasigala e Uganda basobole okutuuka mu jihadu fi sabilillah. Kuba walungi nnyo ebitayogerekeka kubanga kitabo kyekiramula amateeka g'obukafiiri tegatukwatako ffe. Nkomekkereza nga mwegayirira anyweze emitima gyaffe n'ebigere byaffe mu kaseera k'okusisinkana wakati waffe n'abalabe baffe, abalabe ba Allahu, abalabe b'obusiraamu. Subhanakallahumma bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum.
For members who do not understand Luganda, most of the things that have been said is paying homage to, of course, Islam, the religion, and trying to link Islam, the religion, to the idea that these are jihadists who are fighting a holy war against non-believers. But the question that we should ask ourselves, when did this become a sentiment amongst Ugandan Muslim believers or Islamists in Uganda? Because Uganda is a country whereby we do not even just have Muslims in the nation. We have peacefully existed for the longest time. I'll just talk about Kampala. Kampala is a city that not only has Muslims, has Catholics, has a stronghold Muslim, has a very big Muslim community, has a very big Catholic community, has a very big Baptist community, and even new religions always infiltrate Kampala. Like we've had the rise of pastors like Pastor Bujingo and Pastor Kayanja, and the evangelicals have managed to rise within Kampala itself. So having a religion fight jihadist incentives is not of the norm. And it's not something that has existed in Ugandan politics before, or in Uganda's social stratosphere before. But it seems like in this regime, we have a few jihadists that have risen. So the question that we should ask ourselves, do these jihadists even exist? Do these jihadists have an ideology that they're pushing? Or have these people just been posted and thrown back to us to create a jihadist group? As we all have watched the video, they marched out of the bush one by one. One of the questions that I had was, the camera person, how did the camera person know the exact place to be to get a recording of this, of each one of them coming from the same bush? And when they walk around to the corner, we do not see, like, they just disappear. So there is a performativity about these videos, and that is just my take from the videos. You take from it what you want to take from it, but we should now start to question the authenticity of ADF. When did ADF start to exist? When did ADF get to use big platforms such as this? When did ADF come into play, and what role is ADF playing to legitimize the infiltration into the Congo? And for what reasons then has the ADF been created to further infiltrate the Congo? So next, we're going to play a video of journalist Andrew Mwenda talking about him going into the Congo to fight and using UPDF regalia to actually masquerade and put this video online. So that's the next video we're going to watch, and we'll continue from there.
Okay, now I am right in the main captain's cockpit for this Mi-24 attack helicopter. I'm going to bomb the hell out of ADF in the Congo, and by tomorrow you'll see masses of them surrendering at the border. So, news media, prepare for my assault on the ADF in Congo.
The first time when I watched that video is the question of, who actually gets to acclaim these things in Uganda and who gets to do things like this. We all know in Uganda that wearing camouflage is a crime. It's something that has been ousted by this regime. But to get to mock the violence that UPDF is, and to discredit and to kind of make fun of even our existence or our presence in the Congo, that will further a violence, all for comic relief, but not only comic relief, but all to kind of blow the trumpet of oneself, knowing very well that our soldiers have not gone there to shake hands. They have gone there to continue to spread a certain form of violence, all in pursuit of ADF personnel who we've seen from the video are a bunch of, have been presented to us as, first of all, the question we should ask, there was a lot of children in that video. Children and an old man, and all of them just holding AK-47, no advanced equipment. And then later we're going to see a video of the equipment that the Ugandan military is going into that will not only affect the supposed or alleged ADF members, but will affect communities of Congolese people. So I'm going to go ahead and then play the response that the UPDF had to Andrew Mwenda's masquerading as soon as it loads up, as it's taking some time to load up. But I want us to ask ourselves those questions. I'll play Andrew Mwenda's video again for us to actually look at it and pay attention to how he's positioned himself and how he's talking about the situation and what this means to how the public should receive it. Because it's not a joke that the UPDF is in the Congo. It's actually quite serious because we have been reprimanded for going to the Congo before. It is not a point to start to make a mockery out of our existence there right now.
Okay, now I am right in the main captain's cockpit for this Mi-24 attack helicopter. I'm going to bomb the hell out of ADF in the Congo, and by tomorrow you'll see masses of them surrendering at the border. So, news media, prepare for my assault on the ADF in Congo. Okay, now I am...
This video, where journalist Andrew Mwenda is clad in military attire, is making rounds on social media. Mwenda goes on to describe military equipment and what mission he was supposedly headed for.
Right in the main captain's cockpit for this Mi-24 attack helicopter, I'm going to bomb the hell out of ADF in the Congo, and by tomorrow you'll see masses of them surrendering at the border.
In another clip, he thanks the officers for a good job and is given a pseudo rank.
The Colonel General has finished his duties after bombing ADF badly. Guys, congratulations for the great job.
However, it is unclear how he accessed the military stores, which has prompted the UPDF.
Okay, now I am...
This video, where journalist Andrew Mwenda is clad in military attire, is making rounds on social media. Mwenda goes on to describe the military equipment and what mission he was supposedly headed for.
Right in the main captain's cockpit for this Mi-24 attack helicopter, I'm going to bomb the hell out of ADF in the Congo, and by tomorrow you'll see masses of them surrendering at the border.
In another clip, he thanks the officers for a good job and is given a pseudo rank.
The Colonel General has finished his duties after bombing ADF badly. Guys, congratulations for the great job.
However, it is unclear how he accessed the military stores, which has prompted the UPDF probe.
Yeah, this is since there is some legal gymnastics, this is something that really can be investigated. And then we get to the bottom of the matter.
While quoting the UPDF Act of 2005, Brigadier Bekwaso says it is an offense to use or replicate insignia and other paraphernalia gazetted for the force without authorization.
Under what circumstances can someone who is outside the military use, act, speak, by the way? Because he also spoke, but all that is provided for. So if we did not have this authority, therefore, that is an offense, and the Act says that it's given a maximum of 7 years and a minimum of 3 years.
As the investigations proceed, it is important to note that several supporters of the National Unity Platform are languishing in jails across the country for wearing red berets, overalls and fake pips, especially during the campaign period in 2020.
During that time, those times when there's a lot of red berets going on and other overalls and insignias, all those sashes that people were putting on, they did not have authority from the military or from the leadership or from the minister. That is why, and that is why we have a law that gazettes what belongs to the military, to make sure that people refrain from using it, to make sure that people know that once they use it, it's an offense.
Nonetheless, Biekwaso is quick to remind the public circumstances under which a civilian can access some of the military stores.
For example, use in theater. Some people who go out to act films. Some people who want to train, because we've seen people who go to train in shooting.
Our effort to seek a comment from Andrew Mwenda about this matter was in vain, as he could not pick his known phone numbers. Section 103 of the UPDF Act stipulates conditions under which civilians may be appointed to work in the defense forces, including when the defense forces do not have appropriately qualified or adequately experienced military personnel to fill a vacancy in the establishment, or if the defense forces do not have the human resource to provide certain required services. And according to Section 119 of the same Act, every person found in unlawful possession of arms, ammunition, or equipment ordinarily being the monopoly of the defense forces or other classified stores as prescribed will be subject to military law. Walter Mwesije, NTV.
So, news media, prepare for my assault on the ADF in Congo.
I want to bring it to our notice that there are various Ugandans who are serving unjustified prolonged sentences for wearing a beret, for wearing red. They have been taken away for those reasons, and they've been subjected to military court, and there has been no follow-up on this act. But that is even irrelevant. I want to show the next video is about, the next video shows the reality that's happening in the Congo. And I want you to question and ask yourself, is it ADF members who are facing this violence, or is it the people of Congo? So I'll go ahead and play the next video. And also think about how it's easy for Andrew Mwenda to make fun out of this violence or this back and forth. And it was easy also for us to name, I've forgotten the name of the former general who passed away recently. He was called the Lion of Mogadishu, given names and praised for this violence that we spread beyond our borders. We have to understand that Museveni has created a portal of violence, not only in Uganda, but it has left our borders and spread across the borders for the benefit of whom Museveni works for, pays attribute to. And it is masqueraded and lifted by figures such as what Andrew Mwenda is doing, and by naming also of UPDF fighters and giving them these names and accolades for the acts of genocide that the Ugandan military has been forced to participate in, that not only demoralizes or dehumanizes the people beyond our borders, but has also dehumanized our UPDF soldiers as well and their families, and has continued to just churn and turn the wheel of violence that Museveni's militarized government participates in. So we'll see the next video. So that's a video that came out not too long ago. It came out last year. And what we can see is Congolese people headed for the borders because of the violence there. So ask yourself, is the war in the Congo against ADF, or is the war in the Congo against Congolese people? And if so, what could be the reason? Why has war and violence been unleashed onto the Congolese people? And the next video I'll play maybe does provide an answer to this.
This is one of the thousands of unregulated, unmonitored mines in the DRC. It's crawling with children, working like modern-day slaves. A 12-hour-long day of punishing work may earn them the equivalent of £1. Although one of the poorest countries on earth, DRC is rich in minerals. But a history of brutal colonial exploitation looks like being repeated now, in 2017. Much of it's mined by hand, with rudimentary tools in harsh, potentially hazardous conditions. And wretched whether or not, the rush is on for a mineral the DRC has in great abundance, cobalt, and it's fast becoming more precious than gold. It's a critical ingredient in lithium-ion batteries which power smartphones and laptops. An army of children are at the heart of the mining production. Wearing no shoes and in the most wretched conditions, Dorsan is ordered to retrieve the sack he's forgotten. There's an urgency now. The rains make this dangerous work even more risky, and Dorsan's told in no uncertain terms he risks a beating if he messes up again. Dorsan, with Richard beside him, have worked all day. They're 8 and 11 years old. Even this punishing work doesn't guarantee enough for food. Dorsan hasn't eaten for 2 days now. This is what helpless looks like, and he's one of the children making millions for multinational corporations in America and China whilst they suffer in squalor. For this, they'll get maybe 8 British pence a day.
Walitusukuma tunaenda tena tunarudia. Mimi nashikia sana mkongo inauma. Mimi natumia mkongo nilimaka na mbavu na nikula kitu kile nyuma.
The tunnels are dug by hand with no supports. They frequently collapse, especially during rain. The miners climb down using holes carved in the rock and no safety equipment. This most precious of minerals is often extracted and sorted by tiny hands. They don't wear gloves or masks, yet the World Health Organization says exposure to cobalt and breathing in its dust fumes can cause long-term health problems. We visited 5 different mines across the south of DRC and found all used child workers. Monica's the youngest worker in this group at just 4. But even those barely able to walk have lost their childhoods to mining. Natalie's 12 years old. My fingers hurt, she tells us. Miles away on a different site, Makumba Mateba shows us the cobalt tunnel he's dug with 3 of his friends. It's physically tough work. They removed all this rock by hand over nearly 4 months.
It's incredibly insecure for them. Although this is really rich in minerals and it's going down just 15 meters, there's no support bars, there's They have no protective masks or protective equipment at all. And right at the bottom, I can see water.
It's his village's water which Makumba's convinced has caused his health problems. After a lifetime of drinking it, he has a huge tumour on his throat.
Quand on est en train de travailler à Kitowe, là on cultive la tomate, en train de cultiver, si j'ai soif, je pars puiser de l'eau.
There are countless reports of other health problems from those living nearby and working on the mines.
On trouve les infections, minimum infection, je les tourne onako. Kasi mama anatumika makariere sana, Tanzania mtoto na infection shulungula, mwingine kuna bima buton, mwingine ndio tunaona donc makozi linatoka mama wa mimba nenda makariere.
These twins are just 2 days old, and although small, so far they're healthy, to the relief of their mother.
Hii maminere unaleta maproblem kama wewe mwanamke unaenda kutumika hapo. Inaleta maproblem na difficulty kama una mimba. Bo shi mwanamke ni mama yangu kunetupeleka kukwesa mama yangu kunetupeleka tunaenda kutumika.
But even if they stay healthy, the twins face a lifetime of hard labour as soon as they can walk. The children's cobalt is sold cheaply to mostly Chinese traders who we film secretly. They don't ask questions about where their cobalt comes from or who's worked to extract it. They just want the best price.
The black part is cobalt.
Even those who aren't Chinese, this trading market has Indian owners, told us they sell onto the dominant Chinese exporter of cobalt, CDM. The cobalt first mined here is then sold again to the Chinese parent company, which then supplies some of the world's biggest battery makers. And those batteries, with ingredients which originated in DRC, end up in, for instance, smartphones. It's an intricate supply chain which allows easy deniability for the multinationals making huge profits. An investigation last year by Amnesty found similar human rights abuses. Nothing appears to have changed. Most of these child miners will never own a smartphone. They barely survive from day to day. And many other children like Dorsan will be back again tomorrow, digging out one of the most sought-after minerals of our time for a pittance. Alex Crawford, Sky News in the DRC.
Sorry, I had muted myself. What we need to ask ourselves is what is the main reason behind, first of all, the non-emergency, non-parliamentary agreed on deployment of our paramilitaries in the Congo, and what does this avail to us? So I'm going to dive into today's program. We're going to be looking at, as I said before, we're going to be looking at China and cobalt mining in the Congo. But what's very important is to keep in mind that cobalt is rare, and DRC provides at least 70% of cobalt in the world. It has the biggest mines for it, and cobalt can be used in electric car batteries, which seems to be the industry that the world power wants to break into, manufacturing electric cars for consumer reasons, in the fallacy that this is going to help with regenerate. We have to understand that even the efforts to climatically combat the climatic catastrophe that we're headed for because of course, the imperialists and colonialism, we have to understand that it has been our ancestors took care of the land. When the colonizers came, they found the land nurtured, and then they started to exploit. And now they want to exploit it further in the name of making the environment better and at the expense of the exploitation of the Congolese people. So we're going to look further into how this actually led up to where we are today, and why. Because if you start to question, number one question is that we all have, does the ADF exist? And does the ADF's existence alone legitimize our paramilitaries being in the Congo? Is that enough? So let's get into today's program. So the first article, as I said, will elaborate on how this power struggle to enter the Congo for Cobalt started. And then the second article will illustrate how then China has been pushed out of the Congo in order for the allies or the imperialist allies to have access to these mines for themselves. So I'll read from some parts that I did take from the article, but as always, I advise members to, go out and read articles for yourself in an incognito window. You can be able to access the New York Times without having to pay for a subscription. Again, I'll go to the page with the names of the articles. A power struggle over cobalt rattles the clean energy revolution. We should actually start to question if this is a clean energy revolution or if clean energy gives a source of another business endeavor to companies such as Tesla that need cobalt for electric car batteries versus actually using clean energy for the benefit of the earth itself. And the second article is Chinese company removed as operator of cobalt mine in Congo. They're both from New York Times. So the first article, I'll go into it and read from what was reported in that article. Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo, just up a dirt road across an expanse of tall, dew-soaked woods, bulldozers are hollowing out a yawning new cannon that is central to the world's urgent race against global warming. For more than a decade, the vast expanse of untouched land was controlled by an American company. Now a Chinese mining conglomerate has bought it and is racing to retrieve its buried treasure, million tons of cobalt. At 73, Kiahile Mangi has lived here long enough to predict the path ahead. Once the blasting starts, the walls of mud brick homes will crack. Chemicals will seep into the river where women do laundry and dishes while worrying about hippo attacks. Soon, a manager from the mine will announce that everyone needs to relocate. We know our ground is rich, said Mr. Mangi. A village chief who knows residents will share little of this mine's wealth. This wooded stretch of Southeast Democratic Republic of Congo called Kinshasa holds one of the largest and purest untampered reserves of cobalt in the world. The grey metal typically extracted from copper deposits has historically been of secondary interest to miners, but demand is set to explode worldwide because it is used in electric car batteries, helping run longer without a charge. Outsiders discovering and exploiting the natural resources of this impoverished Central African country are following a tired colonial-era pattern. The United States turned to Congo for uranium to build the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and then spent decades and billions of dollars seeking to protect its mining interests here. Now, with more than 2/3 of the world's cobalt production coming from Congo, the country is once again taking center stage as major automakers commit to battling climate change by transitioning from gasoline-burning vehicles to battery-powered ones. The new automobiles rely on a host of minerals and metals often not abundant in the United States or the oil-rich Middle East, which sustained the last energy era. So a question here is, number one, who is going to be able to afford even this? If this is done in the name of combating global warming, we have to talk about affordability of these electric cars. And number two, we need to talk about the monopoly around the manufacturing of these electric cars. And then number three, we need to think about, of course, the raw materials and where they're coming from and the conditions that have been created for the retrieving of those raw materials. We need to start to understand that It is done off of the back and the exploitation of the Congolese people. And when in cases when this cannot be done through agreement and to benefit Congolese people, then violence starts to erupt and military is then used. I'll continue with the article. In particular, a rivalry between China and the United States could have far-reaching implications for the shared goal of safeguarding the earth. At least here in Congo, China is so far winning that contest, with both the Obama and Trump administrations having stood idly by as a company backed by the Chinese government bought 2 of the country's largest cobalt deposits over the past 5 years. As the significance of those purchases became clearer, China and the United States have entered a new great game of sorts. This past week, during a visit promoting electric vehicles at a General Motors factory in Detroit, President Biden acknowledged the United States has lost some ground. We risked losing our edge as a nation, and China and the rest of the world are catching up, he said. Well, we're about to turn that around in a big, big way. So at that point, you start to question yourself, what tactics, what strategies are being used to turn that in a big, big way. Then we'll continue with the article. So here is a graph where you can see, first of all, it's no surprise that most of these products that we have are made and assembled in China, not only because of the labor that exists in China, but also because now we come to the realization when you look at these graphs where they're processed, it's at least the ones that can run, that we consider technology and run on battery, most of them are processed in China. So China has had autonomy of that for a while. But when you look at cobalt and the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, it has the largest amount of metals in the world for cobalt. And then you have some in Russia, some in Australia. And then when you look at other rare earths, you have China. So generally, you're having most of these clean energy metals in existence in some of these countries. So rare earths, you just have a few in the US and a few in Australia. But for the most part, most of these resources exist in countries outside of course, the imperialist states. And then when you look at where they're processed, China has more so of a monopoly over that. Then we continue. Congolese officials are carrying out a broad review of past mining contracts. Work they are doing with financial help from the American government as part of its broader anti-corruption effort. They are examining whether companies are fulfilling their contractual obligations, including a 2008 commitment from China to deliver billions of dollars worth of new roads, bridges, power plants, and other infrastructure. So here you even start to question why, and this is common in a lot of African countries. This also applies to Uganda, whereby our anti-corruption acts and our anti-corruption deals have been made between us and the US to better police ourselves. But why don't we get any change in regards to those things? So the article continues. Separately, at least, a dozen of employees or contractors at the mine told the Times that Chinese ownership has led to a drastic decline in safety and an increase in injuries, many of which were not reported to management. 2 Congolese safety officers said workers were assaulted after they raised concerns and were offered bribes to cover up accidents. Things are falling apart in terms of safety, said Alfred Kilo Makeba, who retired last year after a decade working as a safety supervisor at the mine. Vincent Zhou, a spokesperson for Chinese molybdenum, sorry, I cannot pronounce this, molybdenum, rejects claims that the company has cheated the Congolese government or relaxed safety standards, saying the opposite was true and questioned if there was an organized effort to undermine the company. China has an idiom that goes like, where there is a will to condemn, evidence will follow. Mr. Zhu said in a written response to the Times, vaguely, I feel that we may be caught in the gaming of the greater powers. It continues on to say, the Chinese used the opportunity to begin formal talks with Mr. Kabila, who was then the president, that would result in a 6 billion agreement. China would pay for roads, hospitals, rail lines, schools, and projects to expand electricity, and in exchange for access to 10 million tons of copper and more than 600,000 tons of cobalt. The local media called it the deal of the century. And while Kabila celebrated the agreement, the global financial community reacted very warily, worried Congo was taking on too much debt. American officials marveled at the deal's historic sale. In secret cables made public by WikiLeaks, they noted that previous Chinese investment in Congo had been an informal, somewhat disorganized collection of Chinese businesses. That did not seriously threaten United States interests. So here we begin to see the United States taking on the expansion of businesses, not only led by Chinese government, but organized to a point where the by Chinese businesses, but it has become now organized to a state whereby these businesses are actually backed by the Chinese government and are seen as collaborations between not only the government of Congo, but the government of China. And these collaborations pose a threat to the US's standing in the Congo. It's important to understand that. So right after that, when that is mentioned, then we dive into the second article. So as I said, it's important to look at the timing at which these articles were written. One is written in 2021 and the other is written in 2022. China then is kicked out of Congo by a Congolese court. So President Tshisekedi's office declined on Monday to comment on the ruling. Azarias Rivera, a lawyer for China Molybdenum, who previously served as a top government official in Congo, said on Tuesday that an appeal to the decision had been filed. He offered no other comment. In the past, China Molybdenum has denied that it concealed, reserved, or owed any additional royalties. So just some background, China was accused of concealing reserves and owing a lot of royalties to the Congolese government, and they were taken to court by the Congolese government, and then later kicked out of the mines. But who does this benefit? Of course, it benefits the other person who wants access to the mines, and that you can find the US at the spearheading of this and its allies. Mr. Tshisekedi has said that too much of the profits from the nation's metals and minerals, increasingly in demand as the world weans itself from fossil fuels, fail to benefit the Congolese people. US officials have separately raised alarms that China could control the supply chain for cobalt and drive up battery prices, a prospect that troubles auto manufacturers that have pledged to convert fleets away from the combustion engine in coming years. I find that very interesting coming from a US official, because on the market, when we look at the price of Chinese products versus products that come from, when you look at the global market and you look at the price for Chinese products versus products that are made in the US or in Europe, the price difference there does not affirm the claim that the US official is making. We all know that if you want to get something cheaper that looks like something made out of Europe, you go to a Chinese shop, or you buy, back home we say, oh yeah, in China, you buy something from China. So this claim that, or this frenzy that the US officials are trying to put down our throats, that China will drive up the prices for these batteries itself is almost a false claim when you look at all the evidence and the pricing of commodities that have been manufactured in the US versus in China, it doesn't hold true. Even the fact that a lot of American companies go and assemble or make their products in China because it's cheaper to do it there and then sell it back to us for huge profits in itself is evidence to the fallacy of this claim. We have to understand that the US is one of the countries that is holding up the global exploitive capitalistic state and the empire that we live in today. So they try to rip doubt in our minds by saying China is going to drive up the prices for batteries. And listen to the statement, I'll read it once again carefully. US officials have separately raised alarms that China could control the supply chain for cobalt. And that's their main concern. They do not want anyone else to control the supply chain. And they said this is because China will drive up battery prices, a prospect that troubles auto manufacturers. And where are these auto manufacturers? They are in the States and other nations of its allies. Have to think about who makes all these cars that we see. We're talking about Japan, we're talking about Germany, we're talking about the US. They make all these cars, and those are all US allies. And this is where the auto manufacturing companies are found. So it says a prospect that troubles auto manufacturers that have pledged to convert fleets away from the combustion energy in the coming years. So all they're thinking about is their market and how they can secure the raw materials from the Congo for their market, for their producers, sorry, not for their market, for their producers, and then sell it back to the world at ripped off prices off of the exploitation of Congolese people and especially Congolese children. China has a sort of strange hold on the supply chain, said Tafin Cleverly, a vice president at the Export-Import Bank of the United States, which held a hearing last week about metals needed for renewable energy and military applications. We have to understand that also the atomic bombs that were used during World War II, as I read before, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, were raw materials that was stolen out of the Congo to go commit human genocide. Unfortunately, I'll say I do not have an answer for how you break that supply chain advantage that China has built, other than to say that it is absolutely an issue. Then the article continues. Biden's administration officials have been looking for ways to strengthen ties with Congo and gain access to critical resources like cobalt. A delegation of White House officials flew to Kinshasa, the capital, earlier this year for meetings with Mr. Tshisekedi and other top officials. The US government is backing the review of mineral contracts in Congo as part of an effort to crack down on corruption. This is always an excuse that is being used by these governments. In order to crack down on corruption, they need to extract our resources. It seems the other way around. Corruption is enabled by their extraction of our resources. So this brings me back to the main topic at hand today. We're discussing why is the UPDF, why has it been rushedly and forcefully been pushed into the Congo to hand down ADF, an extremist jihadist group that seems to have popped out of nowhere in these few years to come. So this is important to then go and look at US-Ugandan relationships. And this was taken off of course, these are all taken off of the website of the US State Department. And here it says, US state partners with Uganda to strengthen rapid crisis response capabilities on the African continent. UPDF soldiers conduct a convoy exercise at accumulation of quarterly, these were ARPRP training activities conducted by the US Marine Corps at the Ugandan Peace Operations Training Center in Singo, Uganda. We must understand that the Ugandan military and military services do not serve the people or the protection of Ugandans or the purposes that a national state is supposed to serve, but actually it's a partnership whereby our military is used to strengthen, as they say here, rapid crisis response, which should translate to rapid exploitative measures and on the African continent. Wherever resources need to be extracted, we are there to cause chaos. So again, this was edited and updated on March 18th, 2022. And this is again on the same website about US relations with Uganda. It states here, the United States established diplomatic relations with Uganda in 1962, following Uganda's formal independence from the United Kingdom in the post-independence period. The country endured despotism and near economic collapse. The human rights abuses of several Ugandan governments have strained US relations with Uganda. President Museveni came into power in 1986 after decades of internal strife. Under Museveni, Uganda has experienced relative political stability and economic growth, but also significant human rights governance and democracy deficits. Uganda faces other challenges as well, including explosive population growth and power and infrastructure constraints. Uganda has been a reliable partner for the United States in promoting stability in the Horn and East Central Africa, and in combating terror, particularly through its contribution to the African Union mission in Somalia. The United States provides significant health and development assistance to Uganda, with a total assistance budget exceeding $950 million per year. Uganda is eligible for preferential trade benefits under the African Growth and Opportunity Act. US exports to Uganda include machinery, optical and medical instruments, wheat, and aircraft. So here it's important to start to understand the kind of relationship, number one, that Museveni's regime has with the US. It's so deeply ingrained that they are not going to participate in the removal of this regime or the structures that have been laid by this regime for the participation of Uganda into the infiltration and the role that we play in politically in stabilizing the countries that are actually around us. From Somalia to the Congo, we even go all the way to Central Africa. It's important to start to understand this. And I think we have begun to understand this. But now it's important to understand why there's this rhetoric of terror in Africa and why the military is being used, especially the Ugandan military. So we must start to examine critically why the Congolese forces and the UPDF have united to hand down an in-existence ADF. And I say this because it's important to know that earlier on this year, Uganda is asked to pay almost 325 or 65, sorry, I get that amount wrong, million back to the Congo for Uganda's participation in warmongering in the Congo. But here it's framed that we are in collaboration with the Congolese to fight ADF, which seems to be a Ugandan problem, or ADF extremist groups in the Congo. So next I'm going to play a video elaborating or saying more about this collaboration, and then we will go into the closing remark of today's show.
Soldiers from two countries armed for one common enemy. From Uganda have joined. Soldiers from two countries on the hunt for one common enemy. Troops from Uganda have joined their counterparts in Democratic Republic of Congo, hoping that together they'll defeat rebels from the Allied Democratic Forces, or ADF. Their targets include the DRC's Rwenzori Mountains, where the armed group established itself more than 25 years ago.
Our Ugandan allies carried out an airstrike across our border earlier this week. Now, together with our DRC troops, we're on the move, on a mission to push out the rebels in the region.
It's an unusual collaboration between Uganda and the DRC, but both governments say the ADF poses a threat they can't afford to ignore. The armed group is accused of having links to ISIL and killing hundreds of people in village raids in northeastern Democratic Republic of Congo. And Uganda blames it for suicide bombings last month in its capital, Kampala.
We're very happy both governments are working together. We've suffered and cried because of all the insecurity and killings. We support it and encourage both armies.
Villages like these often bear the brunt of the violence. Entire communities have been displaced, and regional leaders fear the fighting can spill over to other neighboring countries.
We are ready to defeat the terrorists, and we are ready to bring peace back to Eastern DRC.
Ugandan troops say they're ready to stay in the DRC until the rebels are pushed out. But critics fear the presence of foreign troops could lead to more unrest, and perhaps to the rise of other armed groups. Katia Lopez-Odoyan, Al Jazeera. The first question that we should ask ourselves, when I watched that video, number one question was, where are they going to be pushed out into? Number one. Number two is, in that video, they do talk about Ugandans leading the airstrike. So that already shows you the inputs that we get from the US in aircrafts and the role that they play. We have taken on the role, like, you know, when you become an underwing of someone else. For example, we have been, Uganda as a state under Museveni's regime is used to police. Like last week we looked at Rwanda and its role in Mozambique. But the same thing is happening here with us and our role right now in the Congo. And the general said that they're there to restore peace. But what happened to peace in Somalia? Why hasn't peace ever been restored in Somalia? Why a few weeks ago was the US bombing Somalia? While we were outcrying the war crimes that Russia was doing to Ukraine. But why was the US bombing Somalia? Why is the US continuously bombing Syria? These are all questions we should think about. Who gets to have a legitimate war zone and who gets to have an illegitimate war zone? And it all then downsides on the people. And why is Uganda in the Congo? That is still a question. And it's also a realization that we must come to, that Museveni's regime, and it's important that this message goes further, is not going to be overthrown by an external force. The overthrowing of this regime for the benefit of Omuntu Wawansi, as we say, or everyday people, us, the people in the masses, must be done by us, because only then can we secure a regime that will function for our benefits. But if we wait for outsiders to dictate who then gets into power, we are going to see the same patterns played out and be dissatisfied. For example, let's look at all the regime changes in Uganda. From independence, you have Kabaka Mutesa going into exile and having Obote. Obote is overthrown to put in Idi Amin by the help of the British. And then right after that, the Tanzanians and the help of also other external powers help in the overthrowing of Idi Amin's regime to bring back Obote. Right before Obote, then you have the rise of Museveni, overthrowing Tito Okello and taking on the glory of other mercenaries who had actually fought that war
But then immediately after he does that, Museveni's regime starts to be supported by the US, which then in the post-colony, the US becomes the main colonizer and funding this regime. So even though Museveni is removed and someone else is put into power, if it is done by outsiders, we're going to be seeing the same inefficiencies, not only in Uganda, but in neighboring countries as well. We're going to continue to be a military arm that is being used to spread violence. And we should understand that if Uganda's military is being used to kill people around us in the Congo, or is being used to kill people in Somalia, that same violence is going to be bred at home. It's because international foreign policy and the local policy are intertwined. You cannot protect the people back at home and then go spread violence elsewhere. That doesn't happen. So whoever comes into power, if they are backed up and the regime change is supported and helped, first of all, we must understand that they are not interested in a regime change whereby their puppet Museveni is out of power. They preferably would like to have someone like Museveni, preferably Muhoozi, kind of do what they did in Haiti, which was Papa Doc, was supported by the Americas, and then, of course, Baby Doc, his son, came into power. That would be the ideal situation. And their regimes were very violent internally in the country. They killed so many Haitians. They're not interested in a regime change that will benefit the people, because Uganda has to continuously do what it's been doing. So we have to understand that any collaboration with any outside parties must be not only for the benefit of Ugandan people, but for the benefit of African people. We need to start to look at this from that lens and from that point of view. Because until Africa is free, especially the Congo, for the resources that it has, what do you think they're going to do after they leave the Congo? They will be coming for yours. So this is why it is important to understand that Museveni has been supported for decades, decade after decade, by these governments, funded, backed by them. And any regime change would be for the benefit of the continuation of the massacre and the genocide and the exploitation of our people and their resources. There is no other foreign policy that they wish to have with African people. Because it's the same idea when we go back in our history and think about the enslavement of our African people. They were chiefs and leaders who wanted to trade other commodities with these powers that had guns and bombs. But they did not want that. So it is up to us to know and understand that these are the stakes. We need to understand the stakes of what we're dealing with and start to see our liberation through a lens where we're actually liberated and not put in another situationship. We need to start to understand that primarily Museveni is supported, funded, his military, the same military and the same UPDF that assaults Ugandans, as I've shown, has been trained by the same US and all these organizations that we write to. And yes, it is good to visualize, to bring that into the mainstream media and talk about the violence, but we must also understand that we cannot stop there and leave the autonomy and the power for them to stop that violence from happening to us. Because if that was the case, such violence that happened in Luwero should have been the #1 stop, whereby Museveni, if they did care about the violence, then Museveni should have been tried. What Muhoozi did in Kasese should have been enough. What Museveni did this November in 2020 should have been enough. What Museveni did during Kayunga riots should have been enough. What Museveni did in Somalia should have been enough. We need to start to understand that this is all about the economy and having autonomy over supply chains. But we have the resources to dispower us and dispose us. They then control who is presented to us as rulers, who then give easy access to these supplies with the help of course, military backing. So by understanding that, we need to know that number one, Museveni's regime will not be ousted just because we have raised all the human rights concerns. Number two, any regime that walks into this via the aid of the US overturning this government, or the aid of, we need to think about then what are their interests? What have they offered them? Because if they had any incentive of changing the regime, they should have done it a long time ago. So we need to start to think about those things, and we need to examine them very closely. I'm going to play one last video, or one last thing that I'm going to discuss, so that we understand this creation of extremist jihadists and their relationship to, of course, the war on terror that was introduced by the US, and why this is seeping into the African continent, and how that allows for militancy and warmongering that makes it easier to extract resources, because a destabilized region is easy to extract resources from with no answers or no explanation to be given. So I want us to look at this tweet. Now it says, because he isn't a smooth conman like Bill Clinton or Obama, Biden often blurts out the truth about US policy. When it comes to Syria, he admitted that the US side spent hundreds of millions to arm Al-Qaeda and the extremist elements of jihadis. And I want us to watch this video, and then after I'll come back and close the show, because it's important for us to understand that these groups do not pop out. And first of all, number one question is, where do they get all this ammunition from? These are groups that are funded, aided to create this rhetoric that allows for the destabilizing of a community, of an area, usually for political gain, for economic gain, and for advancement of this empire. So once we understand that as Ugandans, we will start to understand where we are at, what we can fight for, and how we can actually start to fight for it.
What my constant cry was our biggest problem is our allies. Our allies in the region were our largest problem in Syria. The Turks were great friends, and I have a great relationship with Erdogan, which I just spent a lot of time with. The Saudis, the Emiratis, etc. What were they doing? They were so determined to take down Assad and essentially have a proxy Sunni-Shia war. What did they do? They poured hundreds of millions of dollars and thousands of tons of weapons into anyone who would fight against Assad, except that the people who were being supplied were al-Nusra and al-Qaeda and the extremist elements of jihadis coming from other parts of the world. Now you think I'm exaggerating? Take a look. Where did all of this go? So now what's happening? All of a sudden, everybody's awakened because this outfit called ISIL, which was Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which when they were essentially thrown out of Iraq, found open space and territory in eastern Syria, worked with al-Nusra, who we declared a terrorist group early on, and we could not convince our colleagues to stop supplying them.
So I wanted to end with that so that we understand that even these groups themselves We look at Afghanistan, and of course, the extremist groups were funded to enable the breaking apart of the Soviet Union. No, sorry, not the Soviet Union. Was it? Oh yeah, the Soviet Union. And when we look at that history, and when we look at what's happening, you know, as Africans, we have to learn about what US policy has been in other places. And we need to be very keen about what US policy is in Africa. And that is the extraction of African resources, the extraction of the exploitation of African labor, and for the building of the empire. So you can imagine all these cars are to be manufactured and made offshore at the cost of Congolese people and Congolese children who are not even thought of to have a different future or a different reality. It lies on us to make this difference and this change. I brought this program today so that we understand once and for all that it is not in the US, not only US people, but the US government itself. It is not in their best interest to change how the regime in Uganda is running. It's not in their best interest. And if they are to change government, it's going to be the same political policies that will change from regime to regime. So it's in our best interest to make collaborations that will benefit not only us, but our neighbors, and will uplift our economies and help us to build ourselves and finally liberate ourselves from the system of capitalism, of exploitation, of imperialistic violence, of genocide. I want to thank everyone who is here today. I know I came late. I want to apologize for my tardiness. I'll try to keep it on time next time, but I want to appreciate everyone who keeps coming back to the shows, people who are spreading the message. Let us be students, let us be teachers as well. And as I say, always teach one to teach 10. Spread the message. We are the answer to our liberation. No leader or no one person is going to have the answer to our problems. What we can do is identify those leaders who can offer solutions by listening to us. Once our leaders are not listening to us, they're going to work in the best interests of other people. They have become puppets. But once we can identify leaders who are going to work in our best interests and in the best interests of our neighbors and on the interest of African people, that is only when we can finally be liberated from this global system of oppression, this capitalistic system of genocide. It lies upon us to change the system. There's going to be no miraculous turn of governments. And even when that happens and it's backed by the US, we already know that the same status quo exploitation is going to happen around us. It's on us to make sure that we execute the change or the liberation that we want to live in or be a part of, not only for ourselves, but for our future selves. So let us start to embrace the fact that it lies upon us. Let us start to embrace the idea that we are the key to our answers. No, we are the key to we are the answer to our questions. We're the key to our solutions. It's our involvement on the local level. Let's start to actually root for governance that will make this a possibility on the federal state level to our indigeneity, giving us back the land to ourselves, empowering the nations that have been shackled and put into a template that is Uganda, that then represents American violence on African soil. We have become the violence to our African neighbors when we once held hands together trying to liberate ourselves for independence. We once supported ourselves to liberate ourselves from colonialism, but now we are the same people who are pushing colonial agendas in other nations. We must take responsibility for these actions, even though these actions are not our own. Because once we take conscious accountability for these things, then we can start to think about our liberation seriously. Then we can start to envision our liberation seriously. Then we can start, as only the masses can turn the tide of this. No miraculous one leader is going to change the situation in Uganda. It is Gwesechinomu Nemunobo. That's the only way it's going to change. I know we say a lot in our politics in Zetongamba, but it will not change until you want to know what role you can play, until you, at the local level, you have leaders who can actually create change at the local level in a governance that links you to a local leader. Because right now, this Tripoli of unitary does not even provide for those circumstances and situations, but only supports Museveni being able to sign off UPDF to go to Congo with immediate effect in the dysfunctional parliament. Even though they say no in parliament, it didn't matter. That was a decision that he had already made by creating an incident where the ADF exists in Uganda. So let us be keen about these things and understand that it's going to come from the ground up. And I mean Ugandans in the diaspora and Ugandans back home. It is by our might that this will change. And it is our job to actually protect this change. So with that, I want to thank everyone who is here today. And I want to say, of course, a good evening, a good morning, a good afternoon to wherever you have been watching this show. Until next Sunday, as always, I will be here. And then, we will then delve into the next topic. So please make sure to spread the message. Please make sure to engage with the message, and also engage. An opportunity has come for us to engage in the change that we want to see. Engage in UFCC. Engage and go sign up if you haven't signed up yet. Find ways to play a role in the change that is to come. It's an opportunity for us to actually start actively being involved in our political existence. Spread the message so that other people sign up as well. It's not all about you signing up to UFCC or on the website and getting that information for yourself. It's getting other people to sign up as well and have also this information that they can access and understand what federacy is, what it means to go back to indigenous federal states of Uganda, and what that form of governance can provide, not only for Ugandan people, but as a template or as something that we can show other African nations that it is well attainable. For example, Ethiopia also gives an example of this kind of governance. So we're not alone. We're not the first to think of this. We're not the first to want to do this. But federacy has been in our history from 1962, especially indigenous federacy, because those were nations that were forced to be together in Uganda and have their own autonomy. So let us be the change we want to see, participate in it, get others to participate in it, and then, only then, can we change the regime for what we want to change it for. So a good morning, a good afternoon, a good evening, and no Western power is going to be involved in fruitful regime change for the benefit of Ugandan people. That is key. If anything, this presentation showed is Museveni is still being used as a tool of destruction, violence, and destabilizing of regions for the benefit of exploiting and exploitation of resources in other nations. So a good night, a good morning, and a good afternoon.
Bantate, abalangira bantate mirembe. Kenzo mulangira suna tese akama walero. Kano kama, kabuliro yo kwendesiga. Akama, kagamba munago mesigwa. Kano kama, kabuliro yo kwendesiga. Akama, kagamba munago mesigwa. Akama. abaganda twandizukuka ng'obudde butugeddeko twandikuuma lubugo ebyaffe baabitupako suuna waliwo abalyake bangi bentegeddeko begobaanye empologoma bagikutteko ebyabulungi mwasi babivanako ante ekigambo ky'obunnanfuusi kyabatuulako ayaye omuntu wa wansi gwe bazanyirako batulimba nti balina ke babala akaddako naye abagezigezi ng'omwana kimbugwe laivu yababuuka yakimanya nti batusiba vako kati eno revolution kuzuukusa bwongo baali batufera baali batufumba obwongo befaako bokka beyagaliza na bokka be bano bakalya bokka bagisula beyambalira masuuti basiba mu mpate nga bayiwa musimbi kye baali babala galima lya nsimbi ennyonyi bazifula taxi kala amazima twabesiga twabawa omululu abaana bafa bangi basibwa amazima abalala bawangaluka kulira bali ku mawange eyo bavuya nsonga naye mwate ennaku z'omulyako enze nno manyizibanga nalime wagonda wuya natera kugenda wonyingiriza ennyindo lindako ebinajja naye bwenfuna federo nawo n'ebinajja kano kama kabuliro oyo gwennesiga kagamba munnago omwesigwa kano kama kabuliro oyo gwennesiga kagamba munnago omwesigwa kabaka wafa twetaaga gwanga mujeiko olabe bulene bweya munnange luno lwoya lwa nnyindo nkubasamboko waluganda yonna gyoli kikukwatako wamma abaana b'ebulaya namwe abaana bawakambagamba njagala tufuuke ekitole tulwanire federo lyeko nange ndyeko ne kabaka waffe muwenda kyanonya wamma abaana b'engoma nesakamba alangira bambejjaka kakamba mama abaana b'omusuka kakamba mwe mulimu ekyama omwava ekyama engonge enfumbe olugambe nsenene ab'ekinyoma ekyama mulindwa kyambabulira mwenna abaana b'engabi akama mukagabane n'abo abaana b'ekkobe n'enkimwe eddira namuŋŋoona oli wakasimba ab'eddira enkula n'ab'enswaswa ab'empologoma bafunye akama n'abo abaana b'envubu bafunye akama abaana b'empeewo kakakama abakatimbuma kakakama ab'engona mwe abaana b'enje akama komukabulira abo abaana b'ekibe ab'embwa namwe ab'ekibe akama mukakasuka eri mu baana b'envuma abaana b'emmamba akama mutima nenge waliwo akama endiga enjovu kakakama embuzi n'enjobe kakakama engeremwe n'enkejje kakama obutiko n'akasanga kakama wamma bekebuka akama mukagabane n'abenjaza muno mulanga basoga bakyoli bagisu banyoro batoolo banyakole anti akama munanga akama mwenna akama kembagamba federo